Hello, this is Smart Bastard, and today we're talking about Bladewarden's dev progress. So, a lot's been going on, as always. We've changed the game from being a turn-based game to being real-time. We've prevented the player from spawning in the ocean. We've changed from Perlin noise to Simplex noise. And we've also implemented some basic pathfinding, so that a player can move many hexes all at once. There's a bit to unpack there, so get started. So the first thing that was quite a big challenge, and the first thing I tackled there, was making the game real-time. And there was a lot of reasons for this, stretching back mostly to my experiences with other games, notably Crusader Kings 2, which has a really good real-time system where you constantly feel like something's happening, but you are always able to pause the game and able to take decisions and react to things unless you're playing multiplayer, and it's a really satisfying system for making the world feel live. I think after a bit of testing with the turn-based and from experience with other games, you find that there's an issue where turn-based games expect the player to constantly be doing something, whereas a real-time game lets a player take a step back, and I think that ability for the player to take a step back and watch the world go on without them is going to be key to making this simulator feel really alive. And I want that immersion to happen and for the player to feel like the world is happening regardless of what they intend to do in it. So changing it to real time involved an awful lot of changes that you can't actually see because they're all under the hood, but I essentially had to tear out huge amounts of the logic there and change it so that it's based on milliseconds rather than on the press of the end turn button. So now basically the turns happen very quickly according to a certain millisecond threshold. This was really good actually, it worked fairly well, fairly quickly. But I realised that moving units now just doesn't look right because you can't see their progress. Instead, a unit now will begin moving and will just appear at the next hex, and that's not going to do. So I took another leaf out of CK2's book, and just like that game has these green arrows that tell your army, that show your army moving to a different province and its progress, I've created a green arrow that indicates the progress towards a different hex. Now thankfully each hex is an equal distance apart, so I don't need to do any weird changes with the arrows. They are just one single arrow that gets rotated in a different direction, and voila, you can now see a lot more of the progress of the units on the map as they move around, and this will become a lot more engaging, I hope, once there are more AI units moving as well. So after implementing the movement arrows, the next thing was adding in a time control panel, and this allows the player through the GUI to pause the game, to play the game, to add the 3 extra faster speeds, and notably the last speed actually allows the game to run as fast as your CPU is able to. So I'm imagining this as more of a fast forward than a proper playable speed. It should slow down once there's more content in the game as well, and with these speeds I'm hoping that the player can tailor the game to their own method, their own playstyle, whether they want to play a more relaxing game or whether they want intense action all the time. But yeah, so something that was very annoying during this entire process was the fact that the units kept spawning in the ocean. And this is my fault, because the units were previously just spawning at the centre of the map, regardless of what tile they were on, regardless of whether they could actually move on that tile, and that made testing way harder than it should have been, because I'd load up a world and it would just be ocean, and I couldn't test the movement arrows. I've now fixed that, and there's now an algorithm where it searches for neighbouring tiles and keeps searching until it finds a tile that the player can actually spawn on, and thankfully that actually works. So after that, something else I've worked on recently is changing the noise generation of the world from Perlin noise to Simplex noise. And I originally did this because the Perlin noise nougat package I was using is absolutely ancient for some reason, and I needed to use something a little bit more updated. So I changed to Simplex noise instead, and it has had the added benefit of there being a lot less linear features. For some reason, mountains kept spawning in lines, and it was something to do with the noise generation, not to do with my code. But Simplex Noise seems to have fixed that, and I'm very happy with it, and it makes it look quite a bit more natural. With those out the way, the next and final biggest thing I've done is add pathfinding in, so that a player can move from one hex to another hex many hexes away, and that the player can understand exactly how that is happening and which route they're taking. This obviously required the creation of quite a few dedicated methods in the back end, which I'm not going to show you because the logic is probably horrendous. But the rationale behind the methods I can show you. So the idea is that a unit will begin at its origin hex, and it will know which hex it's trying to get to, and it begins searching from one of the 6 directions. It begins that search from there, and it moves around through each of its neighbouring hexes. And then once it's done all those, and none of them are the target hex, it moves on to the next one of those hexes that's already searched, and begins searching its neighbours, excluding the ones that have already been searched, which are stored in a separate list. So in that method, it goes round and round and round. It will exclude any hexes that the unit can't travel on, like ocean tiles, and it keeps going in every direction until it eventually hits the tile that it's meant to hit, the target, or until it runs out of hexes to search. Admittedly, that has caused some problems, which I'll run into later, but it does work. So now we know we can get from A to B. The trick is, to get to A to B and to know which route to take, we need to assign a value and a cost to each of those hexes, which I've shown in the diagram here. And then you need to work backwards. You need to go from your target hex, looking at all the neighbouring hexes that have been searched, find the lowest value, the lowest cost value, and then move from that hex backwards, moving all the way back, following the lowest cost until you reach the original hex. And then you stop, and you have your route, and you have the cheapest possible route, which is the fastest, and then, yeah, a unit should be able to pathfind. I've implemented that now, and it does work very well, actually, for what it's meant to do. It could probably be a bit faster, but considering it's my own algorithm and not a third party's, I'm quite happy with it. The only big downside I've ever had is where there's a bit of lag if you are trying to get to an island across a body of water which you can't get to, and the game hangs a bit because it's trying to calculate, it checks the entire map to see if it could get there. And I need to think of a better way of doing that, especially if I want to expand the map in the future to include more tiles. Still working on a solution for that, but at the moment I'm quite happy with the pathfinding as it is. So now we finally have a way to move in the world. The world is now real time, so there's constant activity, and you won't spawn in the ocean, and world generation is a bit better. So I'm happy with the progress so far, but I'm looking forward to next time and seeing exactly what we can do in the coming weeks. Until then, take care.